To get started making this braided sweetbread, I am just filling a measuring cup with 1 cup of hot water. You want to make sure that your water is hot enough that your yeast will activate. I am then adding 2 tablespoons of active dry yeast. You can use fast rising yeast if you want, or you can substitute for a sourdough starter. I did use a very small measuring cup, but I was able to whisk it with minimal spills to make sure that my yeast was dissolved into my water. Then I'm going to be hand whisking 4 eggs. If you watched my einkorn brioche bread, you know that for these sweet, fluffy, buttery breads, I love to whisk the eggs beforehand to reach that fluffy meringue type consistency. I usually use a stand mixer, but there's something just so sweet and simple about making bread in a bowl and just doing everything by hand. Once I have that consistency of the whisked eggs that I'm looking for, I will just add 1/3 cup of vegetable oil and 1.5 teaspoons of salt. Then, in order to make this braided bread sweet, I am adding 1 cup of sugar. After this, I am going to be whisking my ingredients together, making sure that they are thoroughly combined, and then I will add my flour. The reason that you want to add your flour last is because it will start to thicken and create that dough consistency, and it's going to be really hard to add your other ingredients after it becomes thick and more like dough. I'm just going to take the flour cup by cup, slowly adding it in. If you have a stand mixer, you can pour the whole cup in at a time, but because I am hand mixing it, I want to make sure that I avoid having giant flour clumps in my whisk and make sure everything is mixed thoroughly. I add 4 cups of flour, about 4.5 cups of flour. If you do not want to hand knead your dough, go ahead and put all 5 cups in, but I saved about half a cup to sprinkle on my flour as I hand knead it and to lay out on my flat surface. Once my dough gets thicker, about this consistency where it starts to build up in the whisk, I go ahead and change to a Danish whisk. You can go ahead and knead your dough with this whisk until it becomes smooth and the perfect consistency to let it rise. But I love to hand knead my dough. So after about 4.5 cups, I sprinkle the flour on the counter and go ahead and use the remaining flour to hand knead my dough to where it is still a sticky consistency, but not to the point where it won't be removed from your fingers. I let my dough rise for roughly 1 hour in my oven at 95 degrees Fahrenheit. It may take longer for you if your oven does not have a bread proofing feature. You want to make sure that your bread is rising in a warm or as warm of a spot as you can get. After cutting my dough in half and then shaping it so that it is more symmetrical, I am just going to create 3 strands in the dough in order to create a braid. As you can see, I'm not cutting all the way at the top, and once I have finished the braid, I'm actually going to create something that looks similar to the top by pinching the bottom. That way the strands don't pull apart and everything bakes nice and evenly and the ends stick together. Now, you can cut your bread loaf and weigh it to ensure that you have a more even halves. I did not do that, so you will see that I have one loaf that's a little bit bigger than the other, but it's fine. It ended up working out. I knew I was going to use these loaves to cut them into cubes for my bread pudding recipe, but if you want to be more precise, you can always use a scale and make sure that your halves are even. Once I have my loaf braided, I am placing it in an aluminum foil cast iron bread pan. You don't have to use the aluminum foil. You can make sure that it's very well greased and seasoned. I did that with the einkorn bread, but I wanted to try out the aluminum foil and see how that worked compared to parchment paper and then compared to just using the cast iron by itself. With all-purpose flour, you will have a bread that rises higher while it's baking too, so keep that in mind. I generally let my bread rise to the top of the pan and then bake it, but do note that it will rise higher than that. I do like a bread that's fuller at the top, but if you want more of a typical loaf size, go ahead and place it in the oven before it looks or appears to be fully risen. I'm just going to place aluminum foil over top. That way it ensures that the top of the bread does not burn. If you want a nice brown look to your bread, you can always bake it for 5 minutes. Remove the bread, put the aluminum foil back on, and then continue baking it. You are going to place this in the oven at 425 degrees for 30 minutes. You can find this recipe along with others at westmanacademyhomeschool.com. Again, I'm Kelsey, and I create videos on homemaking, homeschool, and creating a wholesome home. Thanks for watching.